Hello, everyone. Welcome to AIA Cincinnati's Sesquicentennial Anniversary Celebration. I am Cynthia Williams, the 2020 president of AIA Cincinnati. Tonight, we celebrate 150 years of an architectural community dedicated, in the words of our founders, to promote the artistic, scientific, and practical efficiency of our profession. If you don't know, AIA Cincinnati is one of over 200 chapters worldwide of the American Institute of Architects. Here locally, we have over 400 members from 9 Southwest Ohio counties. We're part of the worldwide community of architects that belong to AIA, and they have over 95,000 members. We were founded in 1870 as the 4th oldest chapter of AIA. I want to thank our current leadership team. In addition to myself, we are ably served by our past president, Allison McKenzie, our president-elect, John Jaskowitz, our treasurer, Jeff Razor, our secretary, Angela Mazzi, and our executive director, Julie Carpenter. Of course, none of this would be possible without our sponsors, and especially our Sesquicentennial sponsor. Marsh Building Products, Marvin Window and Door Classics has been a steadfast supporter of AIA Cincinnati for many years. Through thick and thin, pandemic, no pandemic, Marvin Marsh is always there to support us, and we are really grateful. In addition to Marvin and Marsh, we have 3 stakeholder Sesquicentennial sponsors. They are Cincinnati Preservation Association, the English Contractor, and HEPE. In addition to our Sesquicentennial sponsors, we have 9 title sponsors who support us throughout the year, and they are the Cincinnati Commercial Contracting, the English Contractor, GOP Limited, Hamilton Parker, Kirker Kubala, Mansion Hill Custom Floors, Oswald Insurance, Tisdale Distributing, and the V Collective. Please support our sponsors when you are able, as we are most grateful for their support. We are honored tonight to be joined by Jane Frederick, FAIA. Jane is the 2020 president of AIA. Jane is also a principal at Frederick & Frederick Architects in Beaufort, South Carolina. Her firm specializes in custom residences and has earned 18 state and local design awards. The firm received AIA South Carolina's 2017 Firm Award and Southern Living Magazine's Best Renovation of 2009. Jane has served in many roles within AIA, including as the South Atlantic Regional Representative on the Strategic Council, as an at-large director on the National Board of Directors, a member of the AIA Small Firm Roundtable Executive Committee, president of AIA South Carolina, and a member of NAAB accreditation teams. She has also chaired numerous local planning boards and is a fellow of the Aspen Global Leadership Network. Please welcome Jane Frederick, FAIA.
Thank you, Cynthia. I think the introduction is longer than my comments. I'm just thrilled to be here to help y'all celebrate AIA Cincinnati's 150 years of service to the profession and leadership in the community. What an accomplishment. Since AIA Cincinnati's founding as the 4th chapter 150 years ago, you have established yourself in the community as a force for positive change through the power of design in your region and on the national stage. So once again, congratulations. And here's to another 150 years of success and community leadership. Congratulations.
I think Allison McKenzie is up next here.
I think Julie's probably working on getting the slide up, but I am just here to acknowledge the incredible contribution that all of our past presidents have made to this organization. On your screen, you're going to see just the past 50 years of these individuals who have put forth the time and energy and excitement and passion into really promoting AIA Cincinnati, Cincinnati architecture, and what it means to be an architect in our great city. I was president last year, so I have the honor of being the most recent past president, and I am looking forward to seeing some more women on this list in the future. So I think you'll notice that our architectural community is changing, and AIA Cincinnati is doing a really great job of representing that change in the profession and our community. So thank you to all of our past presidents, and thank you to those of you who will step up to lead the organization in the future.
Thank you, Allison. John Jaskowitz is up next.
Thank you, Julie. AIA Cincinnati would like to congratulate Angela Massey of GBBN and Douglas Richards, also from GBBN, for being elevated to the AIA's prestigious College of Fellows, joining the ranks of the chapter members listed here. Angela and Doug have been nominated to the College of Fellows for their exceptional work and contributions to the architecture and society. Only 3% of AIA members have this distinction. Some background on our two new fellows. Angela Massey, FAIA, advances healthcare practice technically based on salutogenic measures. She developed and shares evidence-based processes that evolve standards for healthcare research and design while advocating to improve the relationship between experience and environment. Douglas Richards, FAIA, transforms the profession and his community at all levels through his inspiring mentoring, diligent leadership, passionate design advocacy shaping the lives of emerging professionals, growing networks of aspiring architects, and promoting good design. So if we could please have a virtual round of applause for Doug and Angela, and once again, congratulations. The Cincinnati chapter of the AIA is also celebrating the 10-year anniversary of the Vision program. Vision is an award-winning year-long leadership program designed especially for architects licensed less than 10 years who want to gain the skills necessary to advance to higher levels within the architectural profession. Candidates apply to participate, and only a select few are accepted in order to keep learning focused and intimate. Participants are established in their careers and recognized as leaders with great potential within their practice. Likewise, candidates should be interested in growing their innate leadership capabilities through an enriching holistic curriculum. The program consists of 11 full-day sessions which convene monthly at various locations throughout the city, 2020 being the exception, which most of the program was held virtually this year. Each session varies in terms of implementation depending on topic and speakers. During these sessions, candidates gain exposure to local, regional, and national leaders and issues, participate in panel discussions moderated by AIA architects, provide monthly presentations, and gain continuous feedback. The program is complemented by keynote public lectures held in conjunction with the AIA Cincinnati chapter programming. This seeks to elevate the quality of programming to the chapter members at large, while at the same time connecting national and internationally recognized architects with Vision participants in the program seminars and Vision program partners constituencies. So congratulations to the class of 2020, myself included. I was in the class of 2020, and to the Vision Steering Committee for providing this experience to a decade worth of industry leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison and John. It's my pleasure now to welcome Paul Muller, AIA. Paul is the Executive Director of Cincinnati Preservation Association, where he led the restoration of that John Houck House, the Powell Crosley Jr. Estate, and the 1938 modernist Rao residence. Under his leadership, the Cincinnati Preservation Association received the Organizational Excellence Award from the National Trust for Historic Preservation in 2017. Paul is also the founder of Muller Architects, Inc., here in Cincinnati. Prior to setting up his own firm here, he worked in the Philadelphia firm of Venturi, Scott Brown and Associates, and he received his Master of Architecture degree from the University of Pennsylvania, where he was awarded the Paul Philippe Crête Medal for Design Achievement. He's also been a visiting artist and scholar at the American Academy of Rome. He's served on many boards, including the Port Authority of Greater Cincinnati, and he was on the Union Terminal Restoration Advisory Committee. He's been a board member and an officer of AIA Cincinnati, and he is currently a member of the Urban Design Review Board for the City of Cincinnati. Paul has a passion for preservation, both as an undertaking to care for the significant buildings in our environment and also as an activity that reinvents and reimagines our cities. He currently focuses on access to the stories that our built environment holds and on finding ways to foster a more inclusive model of our shared history. I'm looking forward tonight to hearing his story about the history of AIA Cincinnati. Please welcome Paul Muller, AIA.
Thank you, Cynthia. Am I on now? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and you should be able to share your screen now, Paul.
Okay, I will go to a screen share and we'll see how that works. How are we doing with that?
It looks great.
Great. Okay, so take a minute here to move something so I can see. All right.
Paul, sorry, your Zoom window is interfering in front of your presentation. I don't know if you can minimize. There you go.
I can. How's that? We are good now, right?
We're great. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so I've been told to talk for 30 minutes. I timed it and it was 29 minutes and 10 seconds. So we have extra time. First of all, thank you for letting me do this today. The original idea was to have this celebration at Pinecroft, the estate of Pal Crosley, which Cincinnati Preservation Association owns. I was really glad to make it available. And so let's consider it that AIA has a rain check for that event once we can all start gathering together again. Today's talk that kind of divided itself naturally into three eras that range from the founding of AIA Cincinnati in 1870 to about the start of World War II. I realize that sounds like a lot for 30 minutes, but it's a summary and I can talk really fast when I need to. So as we look at the founding moment of AIA Cincinnati, it's a good chance to highlight the architects who thought this was a worthwhile effort. I've included a little bit about their architectural work to fill in their lives as individuals, since they do the same type of work that we do. And when you look at them, try not to let their historicism and eclecticism limit your appreciation of the scope of their creativity. These people were awesome innovators in technology, in functional planning, in business practices, and even in educational systems. The steam engine had not even been around very long by the time they formed this, yet railroads had already stitched the country together, changing the way commerce worked, paving the way for national corporations like Procter & Gamble. The late 19th century saw the emergence of electricity, plumbing, the use of steel and concrete for high-rise construction, new building codes, and even the cooperative education system. And Cincinnati itself was experiencing extraordinary growth and change. In 1850, the population was just over 100,000. By 1870, when they formed AIA Cincinnati, it had doubled to 216,000 in this very short period of time. So the growing population was changing the character and culture of the city, and new institutions were sprouting up everywhere as we sort of changed from a pioneer outpost to a metropolitan city that was one of the top 4 or 5 cities in the country. Okay.
Paul, sorry, your slides aren't advancing.
Oh, thank you. I am still rearranging. You know how when you start, you get these extra little pieces. They should be now, right?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So anyway, the founders were in the middle of all this, and they were inventing the modern world on the fly. It was a striking time for our country, and it's also important not to forget that women and Blacks were not active participants in all this. That changes over the course of AIA's history and America's history, but I think it's really important to keep it as a useful reminder as we look at these time periods, that they had flaws, and they're flaws that either became known over time, and that's a process that we're continuing with today. So all this growth and change brought opportunities for the architects. They realized that it also challenged them to improve the way they delivered their services and even changed the way society viewed their profession. It was a conscious effort. They came together in 1870 to form AIA Cincinnati, as Cynthia said, the 4th chapter in the country. Their goal was to take an active role in shaping their profession and, to a varying degree, to having a beneficial impact on the life of the city. And that's a theme that'll come out as I go through these in different aspects of how the AIA identifies its goals. So they had been talked about creating an organization for decades. And one interesting effort happened in the 1840s in New York City at the Astor House. That was the site of the very first meeting to try and organize architects. Isaiah Rogers was the architect of the Astor House, and he was pretty happy to have all the leading architects of the country meet at his project. Later, Rogers landed in Cincinnati, but we'll pick up that thought a little bit later in the talk here. So AIA National was formed when 13 architects met in the office of Richard Upjohn in 1857. Their goal was to form an organization to promote architects and architecture. Basically, they wanted to carve out a new identity for the work that they were doing and elevate the standing of the profession. So this successful effort led to Richard Morris Hunt becoming elected president, and Thomas U. Walter was elected first vice president. When he accepted the role, he said, rather than seeking new members, he thought the Institute should try and accomplish something first, and then others would seek it out. Apparently they were a practical bunch and wanted to get something done before expanding. But a recurring theme to them, and I think through the history of the AIA, is the value to individual architects of coming together in a community of architects. By 1859, a member noted at one of their meetings, almost all that had been accomplished thus far came merely from the fact of our being associated. So when AIA Cincinnati comes along in 1870, they formulated their mission to promote artistic, scientific, and to promote the artistic, scientific, and practical profession of its members, to elevate the standing of the profession and general advancement of the art. So again, they're looking beyond just making their profession better, but advancements that occur outside of that. And here's our famous picture, the founding moment, apparently reconstructed for the photograph, but that's all right. Everybody has pens, probably a lot of symbolism here that will unravel at some point. But what we're going to do is look at just a few of these architects. They all deserve looking at in their own lecture probably, and I'm going to do terrible damage to each one of them as I try and wrap up just a little bit about, oh, sorry, don't want that on the screen. So the first one I want to talk about is James K. Wilson. He was one of the leading architects in the city in the decades between 1850 and 1870. He was born in Cincinnati and did a reverse migration to Philadelphia, trained under Charles Mountain and James Renwick there, where he picked up his understanding of the Gothic Revival style. And again, when he came back to Cincinnati, he was a leading proponent of the Gothic Revival in Cincinnati. James McLaughlin and Charles Crapsey both were trained in his office. Just a couple of his notable works, but in Spring Grove Cemetery, he did some of the most notable buildings. Spring Grove is a National Historic Landmark, as you all know, and Weiss Temple, the home of the birthplace of Reformed Judaism in America, where the architecture supports the ideological underpinnings of that movement, also a National Historic Landmark. I didn't include color photographs, but you all, I think, can picture it. It is one of the most spectacular polychrome use of architecture anywhere. And then Wilson won some competitions for some of the major houses in Cincinnati. This is the Schronenberger residence, which is now part of Scarlet Oaks residence in Clifton. I ran over today. That's a fresh picture from an hour ago. I wanted to have a little bit of color in the presentation. But Wilson's an amazing architect. He did the old main library, which I never saw because I came to Cincinnati later, but apparently this happened before I got here, clearing the way for the site of the new public library. And then Solomon Willard is here, and Solomon was carrying out the work of his father's firm, AIA Rogers. He was one of the younger architects at that group at the time. But here's his father, Willard. I'm sorry. That is AIA Rogers in the middle. And it's a picture of one of the projects that they finished together, Longview Asylum, right, just before the Civil War. But AIA Rogers is an amazing architect. He was not one of our founders, but he was involved in the first meetings to create AIA National. Plus, I think he's important because there are books written about him that talk about he shaped the profession of architecture in the United States. This is a building he did in Wall Street for the New York Merchants Exchange building. And it was so good, a few decades later, they commissioned McKimmey and White to do it again on top of it. They added basically another layer to AIA Rogers' granite structure. He was pulled to Cincinnati in 1848 to design the Burnett House Hotel, one of the major grand hotels in America at the time. And he started getting commissions here. He liked it. Railroads were good. And so he settled in Cincinnati and continued to practice on the East Coast and the South. He was one of several architects that were involved in the design competition for the Hamilton County Courthouse of 1851. This is his version. And it's the one that was burned down in the riots of 1884. Here we have the militia defending the building a little bit too late. It's already burned. And they're the architects in the middle of the rubble. I promise there aren't too many destruction photographs in here, but a couple snuck in. James W. McLaughlin is another outstanding figure in the group that founded AIA Cincinnati. He's probably the most important Cincinnati-born architect during the second half of the 19th century. He and Samuel Hannaford were rivals, and they sort of dominated the Cincinnati's architectural scene among the establishment projects. They got all of the major commissions. And whereas Hannaford was much more eclectic and would move style to style depending on the project and the needs, McLaughlin had a much more identifiable approach to his work. It was rooted in Richardsonian Romanesque. And he actually rebuilt the Hamilton County Courthouse after the fire. The design wasn't really very well received, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it was a new style, and those always look odd to the eye. And you can notice around the corner here, the AIA Rogers pilasters are still there. The entire building wasn't lost, so he grafted a Richardsonian Romanesque facade onto a neoclassical building. McLaughlin was a great draftsman. He signed all of his drawings and made sure that people knew that not only was the architect, but the delineator. Just going through a few of these. And fortunately, we have a lot of drawings of the work for the Cincinnati Zoo, where he created some of these wonderful buildings. The reptile house, the building on the right was designed to be a monkey house, but it's the reptile house now, the oldest continuously occupied zoo building in the United States, and a National Historic Landmark. And some designs for the Cincinnati Art Museum on the right. But his houses had this very simplified massing, a very bold, heavy presence to them. That's the John Uri Lloyd residence at the end of Clifton Avenue, just before it goes down the hill. Okay, so now we'll get to a few of the things that happened. So AIA Cincinnati is formed in 1870. In 1872, the AIA National Convention comes to town, and its purpose is to bring the profession of architecture into a reputable, recognized, and influential position. There are a lot of talks about fires because the Boston fire and Chicago fire had occurred, and really heated discussions on mansard roofs, both from an aesthetic and technical standpoint, because they had a role in spreading or eliminating fire, depending on whose side of the equation you were on. Okay, so we will, at this convention, they continue to lay out, what they might want the profession to be. Upjohn and Hunt were very strong ardents of the old style architect as master builder, whereas other people were looking for more modern ways to integrate their profession with other professions. And the convention was held in in Mozart Hall, which was notably where Oscar Wilde spoke a few years later. But James K. Wilson delivered a paper on about whether architects should be prohibited from donating their fees, whether competitions were a bad thing, and also shouldn't they be paid for, fees should be scaled to experience and the teaching of the architect. I presume he thought he was at the upper end of that, so the group agreed to it, but they said anything they did should be voluntary. And then here's sort of a low point of AIA Cincinnati, and I'm sorry my picture took over the slide. But in 1877, Cincinnati chapter president A.C. Nash noted this deplorable, the deplored uselessness of the chapter and hoped that something would be done during the coming year to make it what it should be, a power in the land. There was criticism of dues and bad management. Nash resigned. McLaughlin stepped back in to be president for a second time. And the only meeting they had in the next year was to face building agents who demanded rent for their room at the Pike Opera House. They decided to leave instead of pay the rent. But Charles Crapsey, the secretary, sort of held the chapter together. And here's the Pike Opera House in its full glory before they moved in. But Charles Crapsey was really an important person in all of this. He single-handedly kept the chapter going from 1877 to 1882. The minutes show him calling meetings over and over again, saying there's no quorum, and then just closing the meeting. But it's lucky he did that, because in 1882, after 4 years of inactivity, National AIA called in, or well, I didn't call, mailed, in, I think it was June, and said, we'd like to have the convention in Cincinnati in October. Will you host it? And so AIA Cincinnati came together and decided to host it. It was a big success. One of the problems, though, was they spent a lot of money on a drawing exhibition where young architects from around the country were told to send drawings in. I think they ended up spending $600 on express delivery, which they took them years to pay. And then in 1882, National came back. I'm going to go through these rather fast, but the profession started shifting to be very engaged in the development of building codes. Again, the fires were happening and buildings were considered unsafe for public health reasons. And so AIA Cincinnati, like many of the other organizations, became involved in the development of codes. Okay, we're going to be a little achronological here because I wanted to make sure I touched on at least the architects who received their little coloration. I'm checking my time. But anyway, Samuel Hannaford, I almost wasn't going to include him because we also know so much about him. He's like the Kleenex of Cincinnati historic architects, or Formica. But Hannaford wasn't born in Cincinnati, but he was educated here at Farmers College, trained with John Hamlin, and he opened his practice in 1857. He got the major commissions throughout his career, obviously City Hall, Music Hall, the Grand Hotel, many residences. He was very much interested in manual training and served on the board of the Ohio Mechanics Institute. And at one time, he was the editor of the Western Architect and Builder. So along with being an AIA Cincinnati founder, he was a fellow of the AIA from 1870. And in 1877, he formed Samuel Hannaford and Sons, a firm that continued for many years. They worked throughout the Midwest. So obviously we have City Hall, the tower at the corner of Gilbert and Walnut, and Gilbert and Taft, which Cincinnati Preservation owns. Memorial Hall, one of his great buildings, on the inside of Memorial Hall. And of course, Music Hall. So I'm using Music Hall here to plug an event CPA is doing October 23rd, if that's all right. We're having Thea Demke, a historic preservationist and member of Friends of Music Hall board, on the Muses, the women of Music Hall. She has an amazing lecture about women who performed at Music Hall and how they changed and shaped the culture, including the suffragettes. So we're happy to, it'll be presented online. And and today we opened an exhibition, a photo focus supported exhibition on the Art Deco architecture of Cincinnati. So this is another Hannaford and Sons building, the Post-Time Star building, which is featured in our exhibition of J. Miles Wolff photographs of Art Deco. It's live now. You can reach it through our website. But his photographs are astonishing. I felt like I'd never seen Art Deco before after looking at them. A really important thing that happened in Cincinnati that I never appreciated until I dug in for the research on this talk was the merger between the Western Architects Association and AIA. It happened, the talk started in 1877 and they held them in Cincinnati. And the merger happened a few years later, also in Cincinnati. But it was important because the Western Architects Association was larger than the AIA at the time. So it really is the final national unification of the Institute for the Profession. So in 1889, they came back and James McLaughlin was elected second vice president. Anyway, newspaper reports of it say everyone was very happy with it. A little touch and go as the groups tried to negotiate how they would come together. Again, during the 1890s and into the early part of the century, there was much more focus on buildings, laws, and regulations. For example, sign regulations came into play. The 1887 building code was obsolete in Cincinnati. It was completely rewritten in 1933. AIA had a major involvement in that. And young architects organized a lot of the events during this time period. There was one boat trip to Coney Island where they were discussing the ordinance, and they sort of wrote the ordinance on the way back, on the way up, finished it on the way back, and then delivered it to the president of the Board of Legislation. So they were looking for they were creating a very influential position for the profession in these. I particularly like this. These committees were formed back in 1885. And one of the things I wanted to do was form a junior branch for draftsmen. And I think this is a really nice echo of the AIA Vision program, which is still doing that. And I think this year, having John move from graduate of the Vision program to president of the chapter is fantastic and really fulfills what these architects were talking about back then, that you could use it as a launching pad for professional careers for people. Okay, so now we get to the 1940 AIA annual celebration. This would be the 70th anniversary celebration, but it wasn't scheduled for that. It was scheduled to honor 3 of their oldest members. And it wasn't until they started reminiscing during the event about the 35th anniversary of the AIA that they realized they had landed on the 70th. But it was a difficult time. The Depression was continuing, which, you know, I think some days we don't realize that it started in the early 30s and continued all the way up to the mobilization for World War II. But there was no work, architects didn't have fees. People felt like that AIA wasn't leading the preparation for the war. Dues were considered too high considering the lack of work that everyone had. People felt like they were paying for the Octagon in Washington, D.C. There was one quote, how unimportant is the profile of Gothic molding? That was a direct reference to the Octagon. So they were even deciding whether the AIA should go on. But the evening wasn't all lost. It was this celebration of Gustav Drock, Harry Hake, and Joseph Steinkamp. And I found this picture of them yesterday. They're sort of recounting things. That's figuring out that it was the 70th anniversary. It was different than all of the other celebrations where they talked about rousing good time and jolly good company and toasts. This was an emotional and quiet evening, and I think very meaningful. The looming war in Europe was on everyone's minds. Here's a little bit of the work of those 3 architects. I think the Grand Hotel, the Gibson Hotel, Harry Hake's office building in Walnut Hills, and a building by Joseph Steinkamp, 7th and Race. So we're going to fast forward. I really wanted to organize that last part better because the AIA moved from, when I said there were 3 themes to it, one, it was our founding and defining the profession. And then the second was laws, codes, standards, and, you know, bringing technology into some sort of manageable form. And then the final one was civic activity, you know, the City Beautiful movement, planning, the Parks Department, the Park Plan of Cincinnati, all the things that sort of looked at the city on a large scale happened from the 1900 to the 1940s. And I was going to stop short of the next one, which had urban renewal and blight removal. But anyway, we'll fast forward to AIA's 150th anniversary in 2007. I thought it was brilliantly done. They created a concept where every chapter would go out and find a civic improvement that they could help with, that they could mobilize their community around, show off their skills, bring what the profession could do in contact with the larger public. In Cincinnati, we chose the deck covers of Fort Washington Way as a public charrette to revive the idea that the foundations were in and that the city should be stitched back together. We received enormous support across the board from the city, the county, the riverfront advisors, and we had a very successful public charrette where people came and 5 different teams presented. It was pretty interesting. The kids table was the most creative. They were the only ones that showed a regional drawing for the context of it. But I think they only did that because they had zip lines coming down from all the hills. But again, I think we give them credit for big picture thinking. Those are the 5 different schemes that developed. And it was a great afternoon, very productive. Got a lot of coverage. We promoted it in the newspapers. Both Hamilton County and the city of Cincinnati modified their master plans to include the deck covers as a result of that. So I think AIA Cincinnati can take pride in having moved that project forward. I do think if the deck covers go in, it'll be one of the major civic improvements that Cincinnati can do for decades. So in our 135th anniversary came up when I was on the board, and I remember the board president came up to me and grabbed me by the shoulders in one of those moments and said, "Paul, don't let the 135th anniversary go to waste." And I said, "No, of course not." And it never occurred to me that the 134th is not really a very important year. But anyway, so we went to work and AIA put on a very nice celebration of it. We brought back a lot of the former presidents and had Memorial Hall, created a timeline for the history of AIA. We had our founders there. And I'm really disappointed. One of my goals was to have all the past presidents stand up behind and lean in with their own pens and secret symbols. But we just didn't get around to doing that. We're having so much fun talking and enjoying the evening. But the boards exist and they cover the history of the chapter in all of its different themes. And I'm not going to go through them here, but early on, recognition for the profession, public advocacy for codes and construction and innovation, enterprise, continuing education, dedication to the arts, as I was saying, in the 30s and 40s. And then finally, you know, the period of collaboration, 60s, 70s, and 80s. We're missing, and we're coming up to a sustainable future here with up into 1910. So we obviously have a decade of this that needs to be filled in. I think it'll be encouraging to see the things that the profession's moving toward now. I don't know how much time I have left. Do I have enough time to finish? I have about 2 minutes.
Yes, Paul, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Okay, because I can talk faster.
Yep, plenty of time.
Okay, well, I'll take a breath. But anyway, what I saw through looking at this history, and I hope I was able to show it to you a little bit, was this, you know, we all have our own practices and whatever we're doing. Pulling up from the work and working together as an organization has incredible benefits, both personally, professionally, and also on a social level. And, you know, here's a picture that was in some McLaughlin's scrapbook that I found of Cincinnati architects. They're all identified there, and I haven't been able to trace down the exact date. If people know clothing and styles, we could probably do that. But I just want to say, from looking at all the other celebrations, I think the 150th celebration that we're having now is going to come with an asterisk. when future AIA members look back at our celebration, they're going to say, you know, it happened at a time in the middle of the greatest health crisis of a century. And they had to have the meeting on something called Zoom. The economy was teetering on the edge of a depression. Racial injustice was finally being acknowledged. The climate was being roasted. And for the first time in the history of the country, the future of democracy was not a given. But I also think they'll be able to note that it was attended by architects who are actively working to solve these problems. And they're using their professional skills to build a better society. In looking at the history of AIA Cincinnati, I think it's a natural trajectory for the organization. So it's an honor to be part of the AIA and the celebration. And thanks for inviting me today. That's it. I will end my share. Oh, I have one more slide. Stop my share.
Paul, you should have mentioned before you ended that charter was New York's, and that ours looked like that, but was tragically lost prior to the turn of the 20th century.
Yes, I have a footnote on it. It says 1870, not ours, but close. But yeah, you're right. It was lost.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. And I think Cynthia is going to take us out now.
Yes, thank you so much, Paul. We are so privileged to share a legacy with our founders and all of our early members. So everyone get your glass, raise your glass to honor the last 150 years, celebrate our present, and embrace our future. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, John and Allison and Paul and Jane for being here tonight, and all of you who joined us. It's really wonderful to have so many past presidents and in the room, the Zoom room, as well as a number of our younger members. Got a solid representation of our fellows and quite a few of our sponsors and supporters, and we really appreciate that. So thank you all so very much, and we'll get you out of here in time for dinner. So everybody have a wonderful evening, and we look forward to seeing you at our next program.
Thank you, Julie, for doing this.
Thank you for doing this. It's great.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.